May 12th, 2001 into order. And have roll call and public notification.
Bob Rogers.
Here.
Oscar Stowe.
Here.
John Thanks.
Here.
Terry Lee.
Here.
Carolyn Bartlett. Here. Pam Fogg. Here. Bill Stradle.
Here.
Gary Taxell.
He's here.
I can say that.
He's here.
Jim Gores.
Present.
Gary Nelson.
Here.
Roberta Mosenstein. Here. Steve Olson.
Here.
Steve Johnson.
Here.
Carol Moen. Here. Eric Panier. I see it online.
Here.
Ryoki.
Here.
Russ Rinzig.
Here.
Todd Gerlin.
Here.
Jerry McRoberts.
Here.
Barb Thompson. Bun Hansen.
Here.
Stacy Wenzel. Here. Dana Heller. Bob Anderson.
Here.
Dan Buchanan.
Here.
Don Horstman. Bill Efforts let us know he wouldn't be able to be here. Bert Skinner.
Here.
Bill Heineke.
Here.
We have 25 present, 4 absent at this time. ID and Cook County clerks have complied with open meeting public notification laws. Meeting notices are posted on the electronic meeting notice board and first and second floor of the government center and the main floor of the justice center. Our copy is posted in the county clerk folder. In addition, the newspapers have been notified.
We'll have the invocation by Pastor Cody from Maranatha. Richard Rice Lake.
Got permission also to, before we do this, this is National Police Week, and we want to take a moment of silence to honor the fallen officers of this year. I'm the chaplain for the Rice Lake Police Department, so it'd be great to take a moment of silence for those officers giving their lives in the line of duty. Father God, we thank you for our law enforcement, and we lift up the families who have fallen officers this year. I know this is a very hard time to be a law officer and police officer in this time, and we pray that you would just be with those families during their brokenness and their struggles. And this week we honor those who have given their lives in line of duty. We think of, even in this area, Baraboo and Glaze, and we pray for their families right now, Lord. We lift up this meeting. We pray that what is done today would be right more than what is popular. We pray that we would make right decisions based upon what is given before us, and that we would be honoring and just to those around us and loving. We thank you for your care for this county. You've blessed us in many, many ways, and we are grateful. So be with us in this meeting, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you, Pastor. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, item 3 is our professional management announcements.
Yes, for the county board supervisors, if you have not placed your order for the full shirt, make sure you do that and you get to Jess Kodak today. We need to know that today. Also, as information, the American Recovery Plan Act, our application is complete, and we are waiting to complete for me to sign off on that, and we will do that next Tuesday after the resolution is approved by the county board to accept the money.
Okay, item number 4, approve the agenda. Supervisor Olson, second by Supervisor Mosenstein. Are there any questions or concerns? Not all is in favor of approving the agenda, indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed by the same sign. That motion's carried. Public comment. Didn't have it. Item number 6, convene as the committee of the whole for presentation/training on Barron County Land Use Ordinance, state statutes, farmland preservation. We need a motion. We need a motion to do that. Motion by Supervisor Rogers, second by Supervisor Heineke. Any concerns? Not. All those in favor of convening to the committee of the whole indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed by the same sign. That motion's carried. And I'd like to appoint, I'll be stepping down here after item number 6B, but I'd like to appoint Jeff as our committee of the whole chair. Did I get a vote for that? Vote by Supervisor Gores, second by Supervisor Hansen. All those in favor of Jeff French being our committee of the whole chair indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed by the same sign. That motion's carried. Also need a vote to, I'd like to appoint Deanne Cook as appointed her as a recorder for the committee of the whole. Motion by Supervisor Roberts, second by Supervisor Skog. Any discussion? Not all those in favor of appointing Deanne as the recorder for the committee of the whole. indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed by the same sign. That motion is carried. Now absentee charge.
Good morning. As committee of the whole chair, my first official act will be to ask the committee of the whole, do you want to limit time for your debate? I see Supervisor Rogers nodding yes. I would agree with that. Under Robert's Rules of Order, if you do not set a time, you go on indefinitely. You close by the motion to rise. Once you set the time, you cannot go past the time if you set a time. And speaking with Chairman Oki, he was thinking 11 a.m., but it's up to the committee to whole for someone to choose a time for it to be seconded, discussed, and then voted upon by the committee. So at this time, I'll accept either a motion to limit time or not. Supervisor Gurley.
I'll make a motion to limit time to 11 o'clock.
I have a motion to limit time to 11 a.m. this morning. Is there a second? Supervisor Gores. Yes.
Can we end earlier?
Yes, you may. You just cannot go beyond. I have a motion and a second to end debate, to end the committee of the whole at 11 a.m. Is there a discussion on the motion? Hearing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. We will call it end at 11 or before. At this time, the agenda as laid out for the committee of the whole authorizes that we receive information from our Land Services Department. So at this time, I will let them begin with their presentations. What I would ask, if we could hold all the questions till the end, and then what we would do under committee of the whole is, this is to the benefit of committee of the whole, it doesn't limit anybody to 2 questions. What I would simply do is go down the rows and go around the room so that everybody has essentially equal amount of time to ask the questions. So with that, Land Services staff, it's up to you.
All right, good morning.
Good morning.
For those that don't know me, I'm David Gifford, Director of Land Services. Been with the county for a number of years. Also today, we have Rhonda Sukis, GIS Specialist. She was talking with you last month about the census. And we also have Justin Everson, our Conservation Planner with our Conservation Department. So today, the reason we're meeting here is just to have an overview of zoning. I thought it might be appropriate. We've had some recent discussions as far as process and how do we get a rezoning petition to you. Just some different aspects of the zoning ordinance, zoning in general. And so I thought we'd just take an opportunity, and I appreciate being able to do that this morning. So as far as Barron County zoning, I just thought we'd start from the beginning. What's that? It's not going up there. Well, it says share screen. I am presenting.
Need to hide the other screens.
Are you good at this one?
How would you have it up there before? Had it up there before.
Let's try out. Is that what you had done before?
No, not there. That's why I had it, but it wasn't showing.
Okay, good. Now go to here. Now go to your PowerPoint. You're up there. It's good. Go to your PowerPoint. Okay.
No, go back.
Harry text all the single time.
Okay, now you're presenting. Your whole screen. Awesome. Okay, now I'll go to your PowerPoint. Because I can see what you're doing now. So, there we go. And I'll just go to the whole. There we go.
Okay. All right, we made it. All right, so, sorry for that. So, starting from the beginning, back in 1968 is when the original ordinance, so to speak, was adopted by Barron County, the Shoreline Protection, Sanitary, and Subdivision Ordinance. And this was really mandated because of the shoreline protection rules that were established in the state of Wisconsin. The jurisdiction of this ordinance was limited to the shoreline areas, so it was only good, effective around the 1,000 feet around the lakes, both named and numbered lakes, 300 feet from rivers and streams. And there were only two zoning districts back then, conservancy and recreational residential. The focus was strictly around the shoreline areas of the county. In 1970, the county adopted the Barron County Land Use Ordinance and Mobile Home Ordinance. And with this ordinance, it was a separate ordinance from the original 1968. Additional provisions covered all shoreline areas in all towns. Subdivision and sanitary ordinance now apply to all areas of the county. And certain towns adopted the standards. There were 9 original towns that adopted the ordinance at that time. And rather than 2 districts, 12 districts became part of the ordinance. And those districts are pretty much the same as we have today. And the first district was the agricultural land district. So then it takes us to 1976, the Barron County Land Use Ordinances. And what happened there is that in 1976, they combined the 2 ordinances into one document. And at that time, the original 9 towns had to re-adopt. 8 of those decided to adopt. And 2 additional towns adopted at that point. And so since 1976, other townships have adopted the ordinance. So the land use ordinance in general, okay, just looking at some of the provisions of it, we have general provisions in the ordinance. And those are, dealing with things such as compliance, setback areas, height regulations, parking, temporary uses, condominiums. As I mentioned, we still have the 12 zoning districts. And with those zoning districts, each district has a purpose, permitted uses, and special exception uses, and dimensional standards. Permitted uses are those, obviously, that if they meet the criteria of the ordinance, we can issue a land use permit to allow that use to go forward. Special exceptions are activities that require review and approval from the Barron County Board of Adjustment, the other committee that works with the zoning department. And we have overlay areas. These are areas where there's rules and regulations that apply to large areas and are not specific to a zoning district. Overlay districts include the Shoreline Protection Area, Section 1741 of the ordinance, and the Floodplain Zoning Ordinance, Section 17.42. So when you look at the current status of Barron County, we have 17 zone towns. Okay, these towns have adopted the Barron County Land Use Ordinances. And with the adoption of the comprehensive ordinance, basically they're indicating that Barron County will govern how the development occurs within these townships. We also, so the 8 remaining towns are referred to as unzoned towns. And obviously the towns have not adopted the land use ordinances. But the fact that they're unzoned does not mean that they are free and clear of county regulations because of those overlay areas. So as far as county-wide standards that cover the entire county, regardless if you're zoned or unzoned, it's the Shoreline Protection Ordinance, Floodplain Ordinance, the Sanitary Ordinance that deals with privately owned wastewater treatment systems or septic systems, and the Land Division Ordinance. So these ordinances cover the entire county, regardless if you're zoned or unzoned. And the Land Division Ordinance, the minimum standards apply to all areas of the county. When you create a parcel, it has to be at least 1 acre in size. Any parcel created of less than 19 acres has to be surveyed, and all land divisions require review from the Department of Land Services. So looking at this particular map here, the green area are the zoned, the townships under county zoning. The other townships are unzoned, but this shows the shoreline zoning, those areas within 1,000 feet of a lake or 300 feet from river or stream. And you can see that, depending on what township you're in as far as unzoned, such as the Lakeland, Bear Lake areas, there's a lot of area that is under the shoreline zoning regulations. They may be unzoned, but there's a lot of area that falls within those jurisdictions. So this is a map showing the Shoreline Protection area. This is the Floodplain Overlay. And what I'm showing here is that, this is the existing zoning districts of the entire county. And it doesn't matter what zoning district you're in, these overlay districts apply. It could be residential, agricultural, it could be a business district. The floodplain and the shoreline zoning standards apply to all districts. So they're a regulation in addition to the standard regulations of the district. So why do we have these ordinances? Well, a lot of the ordinances deal with what the state establishes as, state law. So when the state legislature decide that they want to, when they create state statute, that trips a process where there's administrative code that is created. And based on that administrative code, draft ordinances are established, and Barron County is required to adopt an ordinance to regulate those rules. And so when you look at the Shoreline Protection area, that dates way back to the Water Resource Act of 1965. And the state statute with that district is 59692, zoning of shorelands and navigable waters. That's the state statute. The administrative code is NR 115, Wisconsin's Shoreline Protection Program. And section 1741 is the Shoreline Protection Ordinance. So in this particular case, Barron County is required to adopt an ordinance to regulate these state laws. And so we have to follow the NR 115 rules as it applies. The same is true for the floodplain zoning of section 1742. The state statute is 87.30. The administrative code, NR 116, Wisconsin's floodplain management program. And then based on the administrative code, Barron County had to adopt a ordinance to participate in the flood insurance rate program. So individuals can have floodplain insurance. Both of these ordinances had to be approved either by the DNR, actually both by the DNR, to be in compliance with the regulations. If they're not in compliance, modifications would have to be made. So kind of getting around to the exclusive agricultural zoning. And the main reason, kind of the discussions we were having at a recent county board. So when you look at the exclusive agricultural zoning district, that is based on the Farmland Preservation Program. And the original Farmland Preservation Plan was in place 37 years until the adoption of the current plan in 2015. So back in 1978, Barron County adopted the original plan. And with the adoption of the Farmland Preservation Plan, an ordinance had to be in place to regulate state statutes dealing with farmland preservation. And if you recall, when we were looking at the 1970 ordinance, it indicated the one district was agricultural land. Well, it's through this process of the adoption of the Farmland Preservation Plan and the ordinance that the name of the ordinance of that district changed, because we had to come up with or had to adopt a farmland preservation ordinance. Ours was called the Exclusive Agricultural District. And the emphasis was to have it exclusive to agricultural use, thus the aspect of preservation. So the State Farmland Preservation Program was a question as to the effectiveness of the program, and the Working Lands Initiative was established to modernize the program. Rather than ending the program, DACAP decided to improve the program and put a greater emphasis on protecting the agricultural lands of Wisconsin. So back in the early 2000s, there were concerns statewide of the amount of agricultural land that was being taken out of production. The Farmland Preservation Program was in effect, but it wasn't effective. And so it was the state had discussions, do we end the program or do we try to modify this, modernize it so that we can actually preserve agricultural lands? So in 2009, with the adoption of the Working Lands Initiative, state law was changed, creating Chapter 91, the Farmland Preservation Statutes. And to continue to participate, Barron County was required to adopt a new farmland preservation plan and revise the farmland preservation zoning ordinance. So in 2015, the county board adopted the new farmland preservation plan. That was step one. The second step was to adopt the revised exclusive agricultural zoning district. So both the plan and the ordinance had to be reviewed by DACAP. So the plan first, the farmland preservation plan was first certified by DACAP, and the plan was approved by the county. Then we worked on the process of revising the land use ordinance specific to the exclusive agricultural district. And once again, that ordinance was submitted and reviewed by DACAP for compliance with the state standards. For us to participate in the farmland preservation program, our plan and ordinance must be consistent with state law. So how exclusive is agricultural zoning? When you look at the state statute, when they revised it, they really limited the activities to agricultural use. So just the plain language of the state statute, in the case of land use in the farmland preservation zoning district, a farmland preservation zoning ordinance does not qualify for certification under 9136 if the farmland preservation zoning ordinance allows a land use in a farmland preservation zoning district other than the following land uses. And those are identified as the permitted uses, conditional uses, and prior non-conforming uses. So when you look at the permitted uses, as far as what state statute indicates, once again, the farmland preservation zoning ordinance does not comply if the farmland preservation ordinance allows as a permitted use in the farmland preservation zoning district a land use other than the zoning land uses, than the following land uses. And those are agricultural uses, accessory uses, agriculture-related uses, non-farm residences constructed in rural residential clusters in accordance with an approved of the cluster as a conditional use. So basically, what they're indicating is that permitted uses in the agricultural district, exclusive ag, are for the purpose of agricultural use, ag production. Conditional uses, once again, they're limited as far as to agricultural uses, accessory uses within that district. What about agricultural preservation? So this is where we start talking about the rezoning aspect, where the whole idea of ag preservation is to keep the ag in ag. That's the purpose of the farmland, farmland preservation plan and the exclusive agricultural district. So the state statute spelled out specific conditions relating to when it's appropriate to rezone property out of the exclusive agricultural zoning district. And it indicates that a political subdivision with a certified farmland preservation zoning ordinance may rezone land out of a farmland preservation zoning district without having the rezoning certified if the political subdivision finds all of the following after public hearing. A, the land is better suited for a use not allowed in the farmland preservation zoning district. B, The rezoning is consistent with any applicable comprehensive plan. C, the rezoning is substantially consistent with the county's certified farmland preservation plan. And D, the rezoning will not substantially impair or limit current or future agricultural use of surrounding parcels of land that are zoned for or legally restricted to agricultural use. So the standards that are here in the state statute are the same standards that are in the ordinance as far as part of section 17.28. They have to be for our ordinance to be consistent with the farmland preservation statutes. So when we look at rezoning in general, when the committee holds public hearing and they're considering a rezoning, there's general standards in the ordinance under section 17.81. And I can read through these, and this applies to the rezoning regardless of the district you're rezoning out of or into. Just to read through these. So when they're considering rezoning property, it indicates additional property, the proposed zoning classification is needed in the area to meet public need because existing property of the classification is being utilized or uses that would be beneficial to the neighborhood and are authorized under proposed classification are not reasonably accessible to the neighborhood. So we're looking at, is the additional area of a specific district necessary? The principal uses and accessory uses authorized under the proposed rezoning classification are unlikely to impair the use, enjoyment, or economic value of neighboring properties due to appearance, noise, dust, odor, smoke, vibration. Principal uses and accessory uses authorized under the proposed zoning classification are unlikely to endanger the public health or safety if located in the area. The principal uses and accessory uses authorized under the proposed zoning classification are unlikely to cause an unreasonable adverse impact on air quality, groundwater, surface water, or natural vegetation if located in the area. The principal uses and accessory uses authorized under the proposed rezoning classification are unlikely to cause an unreasonable adverse impact on historically significant features if located in the area. The principal uses and accessory uses authorized under the proposed rezoning classification are unlikely to impair the normal development of neighboring properties if located in the area. The proposed rezoning classification is unlikely to cause undesirable land use patterns, including but not limited to small isolated areas. And the last one, it's the proposed classification is consistent with land use plan of the affected town or neighboring municipalities. So, like I say, so during public hearing with the staff overview, I bring these conditions to the attention of the committee and those in attendance. So they realize that there are certain standards that the committee must be looking at when they're considering a rezoning. And it doesn't matter what type of rezoning. So these are the general rezoning, the rezoning standards, but there are specific standards with some districts. The exclusive agricultural district is one of those that, in addition to the general standards, we have these specific standards. And these standards, as I mentioned, are the same standards that are found in state statute. And these are the ones that the intent of these is to preserve the agricultural lands of Barron County. So now just a kind of overview of the rezoning process. How do we get to the county board and county board actions? So basically, it starts out with a discussion with the Barron County zoning office as far as a potential applicant. Is the zoning necessary? Is the rezoning appropriate? So we have discussions with the property owner, agent, developer of what they want to do, review what the ordinance, what the permitted uses are, special exceptions, and what they're proposing to rezone it to, is it appropriate looking at the other districts? They obtain a petition to rezone. They need to contact the town to discuss the rezoning request. And with the application, as you've seen in the packets, there's a town consideration form where the town board acknowledges if they're either opposed or in favor of the request. So depending on the township, there may or may not be planning commission review. But the town board meets and determines if the town is in favor or is opposed. So if the town completes the town consideration form indicating they are in favor, the applicant submits the application and it proceeds to public hearing with the zoning committee. So if they're not opposed to it, we move it through the process. So we set up the public hearing and we proceed with that. If the town board completes the consideration form indicating they are opposed, the zoning office informs the applicant. The zoning committee will follow the recommendation of the town. The applicant still has the right to file a petition for a public hearing. So what this is referencing is, so when a township is opposed to the rezoning, and we've had instances where they are opposed, it's really a directive to the zoning committee to, if a public hearing is held, to make a recommendation to deny the rezoning. And if it makes it to the county board floor, it's also a directive to deny the rezoning request. As far as the authority of a zone town in respect to the zoning ordinance, the main power they have, as far as control, is controlling rezonings. Because rezoning is the one thing that they can be opposed to and can control. Variances, special exceptions, they can present recommendations. Those recommendations are considered testimony as any other testimony given in a public hearing. But when it comes to a rezoning, if the town board is opposed to it, it's a directive. If the county board were to go against the town board's recommendation to deny a request, there is language in the ordinance and state statutes that they have the ability to veto the county board's decision. And that has occurred, where the town was opposed and went through the process. The county board approved it, and the township, meeting the statutory requirements as far as time frame, they petitioned to veto the county board's decision, and the decision was overturned. It reverted back to the original zoning district. So this is important when we look at rezoning property and the notion that, well, if we rezone it, we can just send that down to the Board of Adjustment, and what they want to do, it'll be considered as a special exception. Well, when it gets to when a special exception is presented to the Board of Adjustment, the Board of Adjustment has to look at the ordinance and what the conditions of that special exception are. If the applicant meets those conditions, then it's appropriate to approve the special exception. So the point I want to make is that to say that, well, we'll rezone this and we'll let the Board of Adjustment deal with what they really want to do on the property, the purpose of why they rezoned it, because when it gets to the Board of Adjustment, they're under different statutory rules where they must follow the conditions of the ordinance. And if the applicant meets those, they're obligated to approve that. They can attach conditions to it, but it's difficult to deny that because they have to have substantial evidence to deny a special exception request. I just want to throw that out there. It's just, that to say that, well, we'll just move this on to the next committee. Well, by rezoning that, the proposed use that initiated the rezoning request is likely going to be approved. Just want to make sure how that works. So If the application is to be presented to the zoning committee, zoning officer prepares a legal notice for the newspaper and notifies the adjoining property owners. So with that, with all public hearings, we notify property owners within 300 feet. We also notify the district supervisor of the proposed public hearing. We also have to notify certain state agencies of potential rezonings and special exception variances. During the public hearing, the zoning committee takes testimony, deliberates, and makes a recommendation. So through that process, that's where the public hearing is held. That's where the testimony of the applicant, others that may be in favor, others who are opposed, present their testimony of why they think it's a good idea or not a good idea to rezone this property. If the recommendation is to approve, an ordinance to amend the official zoning map is presented to the County Board of Supervisors. If the recommendation is to deny the request, a resolution recommending denial is presented. So as you know, we deal with an ordinance to approve, a resolution to deny. So the county board votes on the ordinance, the resolution ultimately approves or denies the rezoning request. So that's the process. So you go from the public hearing, provides the recommendation, and then the county board makes a final decision on that. The reason it comes to the county board is because by statute, an amendment to the map is considered an amendment that requires county board approval. Same as when there is an amendment to the ordinance itself, as far as a text amendment. We have to hold public informational hearings, we have to hold a public hearing, and then ultimately that proposed language has to be approved by the County Board of Supervisors. It's an amendment to the ordinance. A map is also an amendment to the ordinance. It's an amendment to the map. That's why it's presented. We have to bring it to the county board. So one thing over the years, we've had, situations like recently had where the decision is remanded back to the committee. And what I'm referring to is that when there's a recommendation made by the zoning committee, either for or against, and it is up to the county board to either approve or deny that recommendation. If the decision is not to vote in favor of the recommendation, then there is the process where it's remanded back to the zoning committee. And when it's remanded back to the zoning committee, it's a directive of the zoning committee to bring back either an ordinance to approve or a resolution to deny, so the county board can finalize that decision. As part of that particular process, what I've noticed over the years is that when there's individuals that speak to the county board in reference to a specific rezoning, most of the time what the county board is hearing is one perspective. You are not present at the public hearing. You are not present as far as the discussion that the committee had with those in attendance. Typically speaking, when somebody is concerned of the action of the county board, it's the applicant, and the applicant contacts the supervisor. The supervisor authorizes them to participate or be heard at the county board floor. And what the county board of supervisor hears is that one person, not the hearing at the entire hearing. And sometimes that can be very persuasive. So as an alternative, there is provisions in the ordinance. So section 17.81, parent F, parent 5. So as an alternative to, or in addition to any public hearing held by the zoning committee, hold a public hearing on the proposed amendment if proper notice of such hearing has been provided as required by this ordinance. So this portion of the ordinance I'm referring to is part of section 17.81 under county board action. We can't hold another public hearing at the county board floor. It's in the ordinance. And by doing that, one positive aspect is that all individuals that have to be notified, being those individuals within 300 feet of the proposed area, would be notified that the county board is going to be holding a public hearing and making a decision, rather than just likely just the applicant showing up and presenting their case to the board of supervisors. So there is this alternative method out there. So there can be an additional public hearing if we're going to be, in fact, holding a public hearing on the county board floor. So that's what I have, just kind of overview. I'm sure you're going to have a lot, hopefully have questions with the information I provided. But I want to just, kind of get an idea, where zoning came from, how it's developed, the aspect that, as far as farmland preservation, what's kind of currently the topic is that we have approved the farmland preservation plan. We have approved the ordinance, and the ordinance is consistent with the plan, consistent with state statute. So, so with that, I'm going to move this to Justin, and he's going to be talking about farmland preservation compliance.
Excuse me, Dave, I went back to ask the committee of the whole, would you like, Dave and committee of the whole, what would you like to do? Would you like to ask questions of Mr. Gifford at this time on zoning, or do you want to hold all questions till all three presenters are done, have completed?
I would like to ask one now, if that's permitted.
I will turn this over to the committee of the whole. Will you allow questions at this time, or do you want to wait till all three? What is the wishes of the committee of the whole? To ask questions, I see a lot of head nods. All right, because I don't have a motion, I'm going to assume then as chair that I will allow questions of Mr. Gifford on his portion of the three presentations. So Supervisor Hanson, you may proceed.
This basically started over 5 acres by Clayton, right? Our education, it was denied because
It was, this conversation is not specific to any request. The conversation is just a general overview of the ordinance. We're not going to talk specifically about any particular rezoning request.
Okay. Well, my question has to do with farmland preservation. If that was 5 acres of farmland, and where Walmart is 50 acres of farmland, farmland's farmland, how could that be okay? I mean, it was annexed, but it's still farmland, so I don't see the difference.
Well, when it comes to the jurisdiction of this ordinance, it is in the unincorporated areas of Barron County for those that have adopted the land use ordinance. This ordinance does not have any jurisdiction within a municipality, such as the city of Rice Lake, nor does it have any jurisdiction in the extraterritorial area of the city of Rice Lake. With the city of Rice Lake, we have an extraterritorial area to the west of the city. So as far as what their zoning ordinances are, how they deal with land use there, that's a function of the city, okay? We're dealing with Barron County.
Right.
And so, I mean, it's hard for me, Bun, to really answer that specifically because I don't know what it was zoned prior to. I don't know what their requirements are. So it's a separate issue than what we have as far as what we have jurisdiction over.
And my only concern was, this is farmland, that's farmland, and how could Rice Lake do something?
Well, I think it's that progression of loss, and Rhonda is going to kind of touch on that.
When it comes to like ag one land and stuff like that, they're, probably can't about anything. Where does these, variances fall in? What can you, what kind of variance do in any of this? You know, because I mean, we sit there and, as a town chairman, or what do you call them, I sit there, I deal with variances almost on a bi-monthly basis. And what do you call them, and, you know, there's all of a sudden you have to have a variance for maybe a shoreline or a municipal, I shouldn't say municipal building, but what do you call them, a building that out into the country, for instance, like a guy is going to build a shed, and it might even be on agricultural land, but the shed is big enough that, what do you call them, that he has to file a variance because he might do business out of that shed, you know, out of that shop and stuff like that. So where does these variances fall in there? What do you call them there? I mean, such as you're going to sit there and take a piece of ag one land, and all of a sudden you want to change it to something.
Well, the difference, variance and special exception, okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so the variance is, the aspect of a variance is where what's in question are the dimensional standards of the ordinance. You want to locate a structure closer to the road than the required setback. And rather than 63 feet, you want to locate it at 55 feet. That's a variance because we're changing the dimensional standards as far as the setbacks. A variance could be allowing or considering to allow a larger structure in a particular district. If there's a limitation of 1,512 square feet, somebody wants to go larger, they want to go taller, that's a variance. It deals with dimensional standards. Special exceptions are uses that are not permitted. And I think what you're referring to are special exceptions a lot of times.
Maybe.
And each district has different special exceptions, okay? For instance, let's look at the recreational residential district. So the recreational aspect, there's certain special exceptions that could be considered and approved by the Board of Adjustment. Campgrounds, resorts, restaurants, taverns, hotels, motels, special exceptions. They're not permitted, but they could be allowed as a special exception. Same in the agricultural districts. We have two districts. We have the Ag 1, which is the exclusive ag, and we have the Agricultural 2. The Agricultural 2 is, years ago, it was referred to as the Agricultural Residential District. So the Agricultural 2, by special exception, you're allowed to do things that are not necessarily agricultural related. Example could be somebody wants to rezone or purchase a piece of property and operate a repair shop, an auto body shop, other things that are, certain uses that are not specific to agricultural use. But when we look at the exclusive agriculture district, even special exceptions, they are related to those special exception uses. So it really depends on the district when we're considering these special exceptions. And that's where, when we talk about, I was mentioning as far as the township, the authority of zoning, okay, I'll just use, for example, the town of Clinton. If the town board says, no, we don't want that rezoned, okay, because if we rezone it, here's the proposed use, we don't want it there. Well, that's a directive that you have to the county board to say that, no, we don't want that to happen. But to say that, well, we'll allow the rezoning and then we'll just deal with that special exception. But when that special exception gets in front of the Barron County Board of Adjustment and the applicant meets the criteria for them to approve it, they're obligated to approve that. If they can put conditions on there, they can. But that's the distinction. So with the ag district, there are certain things that are allowed by special exception, but they're very limited and they are related to agricultural use. So that's the distinction.
Supervisor Oki, you're next.
Hey, what are the consequences if we don't, if we had, that's the rezoning, we had one that has to be denied by the zoning committee because the 4 conditions of that farmland preservation in Ag 1 were not, were any reason to rezone it because they didn't meet those 4 issues. What happens if we rezone it? What are the consequences? Can the state take away the farm preservation from us? Can they take away the credits? What's the consequences of us doing against what we have in the farmland preservation Ag 1 exclusive zoning rules?
Well, if we're allowing uses, rezoning property that are not consistent with our ordinance, not consistent with state statute, we can be audited and there could be consequences such as, the most severe would be to eliminate, Barron County from the farmland preservation program. And Justin has some information on, the potential effects that would have. So there is that oversight that DADCAT can have on this.
When they audit that or review it, again, this one was, I know we aren't talking about a specific one because we've had several ordinances or zoning requests be remanded and we have questions. So isn't this just one, but this one's right on everybody's mind. We've got 5 acres out of 400 that we're changing. They look into the fact that it's only 5 of 400, or is it an absolute thing and you can't rezone any of it?
Well, I'm not sure exactly what their review would be. I think a lot of it would have to do with, is Barron County consistently going against the provisions of the ordinance? Where the purpose of adopting the farmland preservation plan, adopting the ordinance, participating in the farmland preservation program, are we consistently going against that state standard to the point where we no longer qualify for the program? Like, to me, that would be as much of a concern as far as, are we consistently going against what the ordinance in rezoning property out for other uses?
Supervisor Banks, I'd like to ask, could I ask you just to wait? Is there anyone online that would like to, supervisors that are online, I'd take you next. If you'd like to ask a question, unmute yourself and go ahead. Otherwise, I will proceed with Supervisor Banks. Okay, Gary, go ahead. Yep. You gotta unmute yourself.
You're muted.
Can you hear me now?
No, you should be unmuted now, Gary. Go ahead.
Oh, you can hear me? You can hear me? Can you hear me?
No.
Can't hear you. Gary, you want to type the question to me in an email and I'll ask it? You want to do that?
Yeah, I could probably do that, but you can't hear me at all.
It says he's talking, but it's not.
Okay.
That's why we're having these overhauls.
We're not muted. He's not, it's on his end. It's not on our end. We're not muted here.
I'm not muted here.
That's.
All right, we'll just, Supervisor Banks, go ahead.
Would it be helpful if the townships, all townships had zoning ordinances? There's 8 that don't. Is that an issue in all this or not?
No. It's not. I mean, it's at their discretion if they want to adopt the ordinance or not. Okay.
So some do and some don't.
Right.
Can you hear me
The
now?
last, I'll use Clinton again, where they adopted, and with them adopting, it allowed them then to participate in the farmland preservation program. As far as having properties rezoned to the exclusive agriculture district, it allowed agricultural producers to participate in the program. So it's up to the township if they want to adopt the ordinance or not. And it has nothing to do with the existing farmland preservation plan or the ordinance. If they were to adopt, we would amend our farmland preservation plan acknowledging that that township now is eligible for the participating in the farmland preservation program.
So if they're not if they don't have ordinances, they aren't in the farmland preservation program, is that what you're saying?
Right, they have to have adopted the Barron County land use ordinance, be a zoned township to participate.
So that's beneficial to the farmer, then, right?
Right, and Justin will go, he's gonna touch on the program itself, okay?
Supervisor McRoberts, and then Supervisor Rogers, Supervisor Schradel will do it in that order.
Just a couple of comments and questions. I was on the zoning board of appeals for Rice Lake for 15 to 20 years in there someplace. And we've had some interesting things and extraterritorial, you mentioned that. And we did have some of those situations too, but I just maybe an explanation to the audience just on that issue right there. But the Rice Lake apparently is you tell me about this, but the township of Rice Lake was zoned, correct?
It is zoned, yep.
Okay, and the city of Rice Lake could go by their own rules. And so we had an interesting thing, everybody here probably sees it at one time or other. We had the lighthouse, I'll call it, by Narrows Park. It's on right across the bridge. And anyway, of all my years on the board, that was the most controversial one we ever had because people were really against it. And anyway, but we voted for it because the DNR said, this is okay. But there again, had it been a block or two to the east of there, it would have been in the township. And then it would have been a completely different decision probably. But can you explain the difference between like the town and the city and a situation like that?
Well, the difference is that, like I mentioned before, the Barron County land use ordinances we don't have any jurisdiction within
the city.
In the city.
That's what I was wondering about.
And so as far as to compare the ordinances, it doesn't do us any good to compare them because I can't enforce them there anyway.
Okay. But extraterritorial, you could be involved in that, even though the city of Rice Lake did control extraterritorial decisions at that time.
In the extraterritorial areas of the county, Barron and Rice Lake, the only jurisdiction we have has to do with sanitary, if it needs a private septic system, and land division, because those are cover those areas. But as far as land use decisions within those extraterritorial areas, it's not a function of this office. It's between the township and the municipality as far as either, the city.
Well, thank you.
Supervisor Rogers.
Dave, did I understand this correct? If it's a permitted use in a particular zoning district, an individual still has to come in to get a permit? Like let's say they want to put bees on egg 1. Do they still have to come in? I thought I understood you to say that they have to get a permit from land use in order to accomplish a permitted use.
Well, I mean, if you're a permitted use, it depends on what the use is, okay? If it's, if they're gonna, if it's gonna be a structure, okay? It requires a land use permit. If there's a special, a land use permit basically authorizes that permitted use. We're saying that on that property, here's what's currently authorized, that what they're doing, it is in fact permitted. It's a permitted use. So even though it's permitted, meaning they can do that, but documentation that this is what they're actually doing is a function of a land use permit. A land use permit is not a building permit, okay? We use a land use permit for structures. We use a land use permit for land uses, okay? So a permitted use, it's an allowable use that can be conducted on the property as a permitted use.
But an individual is still required to come in to obtain that land use permit.
Yes.
I can come back to you, Supervisor Schradel.
Well, I'd like to go way back. My grandparents on my father's side came from Germany.
One of the reasons they came here is because they were under the Principality Act, which says the prince, if he decides to go to war with another prince, he could come on your property and say, okay, you're out of your house.
Been around here?
Here, we're gonna use your barns, house the horses, we're gonna use your crops to go ahead and feed the horses and feed my troops. One of the big reasons they came here. And our forefathers said, land ownership is liberty. I agree with that. So if we're gonna quibble about every little thing the person wants to do with their land, I think that's unfair. And dovetailing off of what Louis said, what if an individual comes here and doesn't have their property in the Farmland Preservation Act? How can they be reprimanded or the county be reprimanded for something they're gonna do?
I guess is that a question or a statement, Bill? I mean,
The first part was a statement, the second part was a question.
so if the property is not in the farmland preservation area,
Yeah, the one that's gonna come in here and request its zoning, change.
Gary's gonna.
so I'm just trying to, figure exactly what, so if an individual is in a different district, if they're part of an agricultural 2 district, or,
No, if they're in Ag 1, but their land they didn't choose, because I know my dad put his in originally, was it 78 days was when it started? Okay.
Yeah.
He put his in there. Not everybody did for individual reasons, which I don't know where. So how does that affect as far as perhaps Barron County talked about the audit might come in and do something about it? Or perhaps, you don't know.
yeah.
That's something perhaps you don't know.
Well, I guess I'm trying to, really understand the question. As far as, for instance, when we talk about a township adopting zoning, there's a process through the adoption that the township is involved in the creation of the zoning map. And the process, so working with the township, working with property owners, a proposed zoning map is created. So it's not strictly at the discretion of the town board or the county as far as how that initial zoning is going to look. Okay, so there may be a lot of agricultural land, there may be a lot of residential land. It depends on what in fact is going on in that particular township at the time of adoption. I'll use Turtle Lake as an example, Bill. When they adopted, I believe it was 1990, if you look at that zoning map, what the township did not want is considered, what would be considered pre-existing non-conforming uses. In other words, there were, I'll take for example, small parcels. Okay, like a 2-acre parcel that's been there for years. It had a residence on it. Rather than calling that agricultural, they deemed that to be residential. So when you look at their map, there's all these very small dots of different colors. They didn't want to have pre-existing non-conforming uses. They want everything to be a conforming use at the time of adoption. They could have made broad zoning districts of agricultural, and that little residence on that 2-acre would have been considered a pre-existing non-conforming use. It still would have been allowed to be there, but it would have been just a different, as far as its legal term and how it's there. But getting back to Bill, I mean, it comes down to, how the county basically understands and wants to protect the agricultural lands. As far as what DADCAP is going to do, I don't know, okay? But I think it's important that, that we have that consistency when we evaluate these requests dealing with the exclusive agricultural district. I don't know when, if, how they would, DADCAP would audit us. But that is, part of the process, and reading through that state statute, it talks about, shall comply. I mean, those are created for a purpose. So I don't know if that specifically answers it, Bill, but
Well, I guess I was just wondering about the fact that you weren't involved in the Farmland Preservation Act. That would apply more or less or the same.
Oh, okay, I see what you mean. So, this particular property, or let's say we have some agricultural land, that it's in the farmland preservation plan area, okay? The person that owns the property, chooses not to participate in the farmland preservation program, but yet the property is still under the same regulations as if it doesn't matter if that property is actively in the program, it's the overall zoning district that applies. That makes sense?
Yeah, okay, thanks, Steve. I think we'll, for sake of other people
Okay.
ask questions, we'll just leave that over.
We have a question from Supervisor Taxell. You can use wetland for building purposes as long as you restore an equal amount of wetland. Since she has moved the barn, can the ag where the barn was be exchanged for the ag land where the barn was placed? In other words, can the land where the barn was be turned back into tillable farmland, that is 5 acres?
It has been.
I don't know if you heard that, Jerry. Supervisor Gore says it has been.
That's correct.
But that doesn't answer the question. Are those two exchangeable, is the question?
That's good clarification. Yep, that's the question. Dave?
The ordinance doesn't, there's no provision in there that if you rezoned this, if you take this out of the exclusive ag here, and then you convert other land to the exclusive ag, that's not a provision of approval, okay? Referencing the aspect of wetlands, that's a state standard where they have I believe it's called a wetlands bank, that if you're going to be developing something, you basically get permission to fill a wetland area, but you have to purchase the same amount of area of a wetland that has the same characteristics. That's a whole different program. It has nothing to do with zoning. But there is no provision in the ordinance to say that by basically taking 10 acres out and putting 10 acres in, if that's an automatic approval. We're looking at the land use, the proposed land use on this 10 acres. Because if we're taking it out of the exclusive ag, then, what land use is going to occur there? And is that appropriate in that neighborhood for the property? That's as far as I was looking at. It's concerned with the land use, not just the color of how it's painted on the map. If we're going to take it out of the exclusive ag, is the land use that coming in, is it going to be a conflict with other agricultural uses?
Supervisor Bartlett.
I have a question. You mentioned earlier that if I understood it right, that the town board can veto an approval. Can the town board veto a denial?
That's a good question.
It's a good question. I don't. Yeah, we've never, to be honest, we've never had that approach. Okay. I don't know if
Just a question.
I would be curious, it would probably make a difference if the town consideration came back as a recommendation to the zoning committee to approve in the first place.
And I understand.
Or to deny in the
And I
first place.
understand. I mean,
Yeah.
their recommendation was initial, we did that all the time.
Mhm.
But, okay, so they voted to approve it. And I understood you were saying that, they can veto the approval.
correct.
Can they veto a denial? If they-
John is gonna go check that. We'll come back to that.
Yeah.
We'll come back to that. Okay, so back to this row, the first row of supervisors. Any questions from this row?
I'd like to hear the rest of the presentation.
Yeah.
Yes, however, on the floor, I do have a question for Mr. Rogers, so I do need to honor that, but I want to go around the room before I go back to him, because that's how Robert's Rules of Order Committee of the Whole works. So Supervisor Rogers, then based on that, I'm gonna have you ask a question, then Supervisor Gerland, then we'll go on with the presentations.
Carolyn's question went to the heart of my question, so
Okay.
we'll wait for John's answer on that.
Thank you. Supervisor Gerland, you have a question?
My question is there any amount of land that somebody owns? We'll use 1,000 acres as an example, that's in Ag 1. Anyway, that person can take their 1,000 acres out of Ag 1.
It would have to be rezoned out of Ag 1. They would have to go through a rezoning process.
Thank you. Based on the consensus I'm getting from the committee of the whole, we'll go on to the next presentation. We'll come back to Mr. Mench's response. We'll go on to the next presentation and take some more questions. Thank you.
Just tap it.
All right, I'm Justin Everson. I've been the conservation planner here since 2005. I know a lot of you. If you don't know me, that's just part of my county government longevity plan. I like to try to just keep my head down and do a good job. So I'm going to get into the meat and potatoes of what we're actually getting out of farmland preservation. Dave did a good job of discussing what the zoning aspects of it are. I'm going to go into what are we getting from it? Why do people want to be in it? Because it is a voluntary program to comply with for the participants. All right, so just a rundown of what we have in Barron County. If you are in Ag 1 land and you farm it, you get $7.50 for every acre of Ag 1 land. You have to voluntarily meet this compliance. If we had an issue where in the past we had some agreements that went 10, 15 years, we don't have any active agreements anymore in Barron County. There may be one or two, but they are going to be expiring here shortly. But yeah, it's $7.50 per acre, which doesn't sound like a lot. And currently there is a assembly bill in Madison being brought forward that has bipartisan support to increase it to $10 an acre, which, I mean, we still have, even at this rate, we still have people contacting us annually to get into the program. It's a really good deal for people that rent their farmland out. They don't have to meet any of the compliance, their farmer does, and they get the benefit from it. So as this goes to $10 an acre, it hasn't happened yet. I think it's going to happen. We're going to get more and more people interested in the program. So what that accounts to is 203 participants for 47,700 acres, resulting in $358,282 coming back on their state income tax returns. Nobody really receives a check of here's what you get. You get it as a discount on your state income tax. So you have to be a Wisconsin resident. All right, we touched on this a little bit. It's voluntary. It would be very difficult to maintain annual compliance with over 200 people if I had to push and pull them along. Everybody's in this program because they want to be in the program. They see the benefit to their land and they're getting a benefit back on their taxes. All right, so what do they have to meet in order to be into the program? You have to use a crop rotation that meets the tolerable soil loss limits on your fields. It differs for different soil types, and it's called a T value, which is tons per soil loss per acre per year. And every crop rotation and tillage type has a different T value of what it accounts to. For instance, if someone's doing minimum till corn and beans crop rotation with a chisel disc, they're probably going to be close to 5 ton per year, which sounds like a lot. And I know a lot of people at the farm are going to say, well, there's no way I'd notice that. Well, if you take 5 ton annually per year, shrink it down to what it consists of on a square foot, it's only the thickness of a dime. So when you look at some of these rain events that we've had recently, we're losing a lot of soils washing into the ditch every year. Likewise, if you go with a no-till rotation, it drops your T loss to 0.5 whatever. It varies for different soils, but you're gonna dramatically reduce the amount of soil you have moving on your farm. So along with the crop rotation that meets the standards, you have to develop a nutrient management plan, which a nutrient management plan has gotten kind of a bad rap over the years. It's more regulation. I often tell people that if I wasn't in the program and I wasn't getting any benefit, I would still follow a nutrient management plan. It's basically farm specific. It's based on your current up-to-date soil tests. And it's also yield. It's a yield-driven plan. We talk to people about, what's a realistic yield goal for your farm? That's what your plan is going to be made to, as far as fertilizer recommendations. And likewise, I mean, if someone doesn't have a plan, a lot of times they're just going to a co-op, telling them what they're growing on what field, and the co-op's going to tell them what you need. Well, it's kind of farming with a broad brush. Not every field needs the same amount of fertilizer to get the same yields. And that's all a nutrient management plan is doing, is increasing the accuracy. So we have less fertilizer leaching through our soil in the way of nitrogen and less phosphorus leaving the fields when we have rain events as it bonds to the soil. Another big one that we have to pay attention to is runoff and discharges from feedlots, stored manure. If you're stacking manure, stack it in a safe location. A lot of times before a nutrient management plan, what I've noticed is guys are spreading manure and everybody's, we treat it like a fertilizer. It's a great fertilizer, but before the plan, we find out that they're putting it on fields that maybe don't need it as much as another field, which are always the fields closest to the barn when it's 15 degrees below zero. So that's one of the things that a plan will do for you. And also another big one here is the stream bank and lakeshore protection with livestock. It's not against the rules to pasture those areas. You just have to make sure that you're pulling your cattle back, allowing those stream banks to maintain vegetation on them. And that's one of the trickier things when we have livestock involved in someone's operation. All right, I'm just going to go through some pictures here, some examples. I tried to get pictures on here that you maybe wouldn't recognize where they are, because these are not specific to one place. I could find these things anywhere in the county. This is just an example of someone who isn't in the program, not following a plan. We've got waterways here right next to a river, and the manure is being spread right through the waterway, which unfortunately I see it a lot. And if they're not in the program, I really don't have any say over it. I can't keep that manure from going into our surface water until it actually gets there. Then we can call it DNR. If it's a situation like that, that's our only recourse for compliance. So what we've done, and I have never been directly involved with giving anyone a fine. Unlike zoning, I get all the fun calls. They have to deal with all the complaints. So what I would do with someone like this, that's I see an issue like this, I'd have a conversation with them, and they'd be like, oh yeah, I can shut the gate off on the spreader when I go through the waterway. I was in a hurry, wasn't thinking about it really, because if you treat your manure as a fertilizer, the stuff that goes in here, it's not going on your crops. So that's one of the conversations we have with guys, and we get pretty good results from those conversations. All right, here's an example of someone who is following a plan. It takes a little more time to avoid those areas of concentrated flow, but they do it and they get used to it, and we have a lot less runoff. We're not going to prevent every bit of runoff, but we can prevent an awful lot. All right, here's an issue with a crop rotation that is not meeting T. And again, we could find this in any township. Basically, we'd have a conversation with this person. We have many programs available to resolve something like this. This is on a headland, and it just happened to wash after a rain event. It was snap beans. So we have a headland program right now where we can sign people up to get cost sharing to seed these areas down. And they can still harvest the forage off of these areas. On the other side of things, this farmer took it upon himself after conversations to incorporate some cover crops in his rotation so that his crop rotation would meet the T value on his farm and he'd be eligible for the credit. All right, so what are we getting from all this? It's good for everybody, the Farmland Preservation Program. Farmers like the credit. They like the improved soil health. They like reducing runoff. And everyone else likes improved water quality. At its core, farmland preservation is for protecting farmland and giving people a benefit for these extra regulations that they have to follow, but also it benefits the public of Barron County in general. Farmland preservation also generates a lot of, it's one of our biggest tools in correcting issues that we see on the landscape. Here's a constructed waterway that we've done. We've got a mulcher here that, I don't know if many of you have seen that, but it's kind of an old relic, but it still works really good. So we'll go out and mulch these waterways and control runoff. But yeah, we let people know how they can achieve compliance and we help them get there. But it always helps when you have willing participants too. Oh, I think I went too far, Dave.
Scroll up.
Oh, wrong way. Oh. All right, so that was my last slide. Oh, here. This is DADCAP's map of exclusive ag zoning in areas of farmland preservation. So you look at that map and Barron County has a fair share of it available. That's why we have such good participation. And I see that as only increasing. If that assembly bill passes, I know people are going to be calling for sure. Because when it went from, in 2015 is when they upgraded the program. It used to be based on what your farming income was, what your taxes were, and then it was a ratio. In 2015, they changed it to just a flat $7.50 per acre payment. And you also at that time had to have a certificate of compliance. The big difference there was we had a lot of people that were claiming the credit that we had no idea of. They basically, when they filed their taxes, there was a box. Their tax preparer would say, would you like to claim this credit? You're a farmer. And they'd say, sure, I want that. Why not? Well, in 2015, we had to send to the Department of Revenue a list of all participants and a specific number, their serial number on their certificate in order for them to claim. So I had a bunch of calls that year from people that I'd never met saying, yeah, I'm supposed to give my tax preparer this number. I said, okay, how's your compliance? Have you met your compliance and your nutrient management plan? Well, what's that? I said, well, you have to do some things in order to get this money. It's just, it was a surprise to people. A lot of people claiming that we didn't know about. So, DADCAP requires us to track every participant by parcel. We have a spreadsheet that we maintain, and Rhonda has done a good job of pushing and prodding me to get that updated and ready so that IT can send me a list every first of the month on any ownership changes, acreage changes for any parcel for every participant. So I think I took a while with that because I knew it was going to increase my workload, but we're there and it works out really well. And DADCAP requires that we do have that kind of tracking. So I guess we can kick it over to Rhonda at this time, or do you have any questions?
Rhonda, go ahead.
Well, this map here just shows, the general as far as active participants in general, okay? But one thing I want to point out is that, Justin's referenced that DADCAP requires, they require, part of that chapter 91 is compliance. How many, what's the percentage each year you're supposed to?
Oh, that's true. We're supposed to check a quarter annually of all participants. We end up checking way more than that because Nutrient management is an annual compliance requirement, even though they make it say like you only have to check a quarter of participants. We end up having to check everyone for the nutrient management aspect. If someone doesn't have a plan done and our deadline is June 1st, and I know I've got a pile of people out there right now that are still, I'm waiting on, they're basically out of luck for this crop or for this tax year. I had to put a big old 0 on the spreadsheet and send that to the Department of Revenue. But yeah, we are required to check a quarter of participants annually. And we check everybody's nutrient management plan annually. So it's a lot of work, but you get through it.
Okay, I'm gonna talk about the picture in just a minute, but thanks, Justin. Ron DeSukis, in case you don't know me already, I talked with you last month about redistricting. I'm the GIS specialist, so I do primarily the mapping for the county. Our county's bountiful natural resources were a major factor when I chose to move here 18 years ago from southeastern Wisconsin. As a GIS specialist, I was not especially knowledgeable regarding zoning. I only knew it was a tough job because people don't like anybody telling them what they can't do. As many of you know, the zoning, soil and water conservation, and land information departments were combined in 2009 to become land services. I was familiar with soil and water conservation, having worked in this department for another county. But I'd like to briefly share what I've learned about zoning this last decade or so. Zoning is ultimately about land use. It's about trying to keep same uses clustered together to avoid conflicts between landowners. It's also ultimately about preserving the huge investments of money and time that folks put into their properties. Our staff is often called upon to mediate conflicts. The person who calls the office one week to argue about a project they'd like to do is the same one who calls the next week complaining about what their neighbor is doing. Landowners who are never going to do something quite often do just that, usually about 3 weeks later. I've also learned that zoning districts outline permitted uses and special exception uses, as Dave mentioned, and these districts apply to the land, not to the particular landowner. Land ownership is not static, and someday there will be another owner who is allowed the uses of that district. As with all rules and regulations, they apply regardless of how willing someone is to follow them or how nice or nasty they are. I do not envy the zoning staff as they patiently and kindly explain the provisions of the land use ordinance. I'd like to focus now on our Ag 1 zoning district. You are all residents of Barron County, so I don't need to tell you how important agriculture is to our county. Many details of this fact are illustrated in the county's farmland preservation plan. Of course, as the population of the state and nation grows, more people need a place to live, shop, get medical services, etc., but they also need food. I want to share several examples of how this growth has impacted Wisconsin's farmland. My first picture here is on the northeast side of the city of Janesville, in the southern part of the state. If you aren't familiar with this area, it has beautiful, dark, rich soils in large tracts. These snapshots cover roughly the same area. You can start to see that little triangular road on the west side. Oh, I can do this, okay. Right here. Sort of see this in both pictures. Right here. And I've outlined this pink outline here is a section, which is a square mile or 640 acres. Okay, this is the first picture on the left is from 1939, and the one on the right is the current development of that property. This development occurred as the city grew. It has smaller lots. It's near services such as shopping, fire protection, etc. But can you see how there might be a land use conflict? If this farmer needs to spread manure or spray pesticides alongside these homes, I'm sure driving farm equipment to these fields is not a relaxing experience. This next example is in, sort of hard to see, is in the southwest side of Waukesha County, just east of where I grew up. While this wasn't the greatest soil or topography for farming, the predominant land use between these two communities, here and here on the edges, in these 6.5 miles was agriculture. Now there are, you can sort of see in this picture, this is the current picture. This is 1950, so not quite as long as that last photo. Yeah, you can't quite see real well, but there are large lots with expensive homes, and these folks are not shy about complaining when there is dust, manure smell, or spraying occurring during their homes. Was this a good change of land use? Are the farmers in the minority in this area now? Is agriculture no longer the preferred land use? It's something to think about. My final example is closer to home. This is the south side of Eau Claire. This is 1939, and this is today on the right. Again, these squares represent a 640-acre section. You can sort of orient yourself. This little pond right here is the pond that's just right next to the mall. Are homes necessary? Of course they are. Shopping, yes. Again, this is the outward growth of an existing city, but it shows that development of farmland doesn't just happen somewhere else. Since I'm a mapper, this is my example of illustrating how Barron County's agricultural lands become more important annually as population grows and farmland is converted to other uses. This development might be in large tracts, or it might be acre by acre until farming practices can no longer occur due to landowner conflict or economy of scale. Agricultural lands are not just acreage waiting for better or more profitable uses such as housing or businesses. Someone once told me they aren't making any more land. This is both obvious and profound. As Dave mentioned, State Statute 91 directed counties to renew their commitments to farmland preservation. Barron County did so with our updated plan in 2015, followed by our updated ordinance in 2016. I assisted with these updates and revisions not only in mapping capacity, but comprehensively due to my interest in and background in conservation. In closing, Barron County has a great legacy of agriculture, and we have the plans, infrastructure, and landowner investments to continue this heritage. And whether or not you are a fan of zoning, it does play an important role in protecting the resources and investments, which are important not just to the landowners, but to all of us. I, for one, am happy to live here and agree with our motto that it's a great place to visit and a better place to live. Thank you.
Thank you, Rhonda. Okay, we have a question on the floor that wasn't answered by Supervisor Bartlett, so Mr. Minch, I'll give you the floor.
Okay, good morning. Under the it's chapter 59 that covers zoning, and when a town decides to adopt comprehensive zoning, they set the districts before they go in. So the way the statute is set up is that both the county and the township work together to figure out what those zoning districts will be. So they're set, so they can be changed, and there's a process to change them, but it's presumed that those are the proper districts. And so when there's something to be changed, the town has an opportunity to object to that change. It doesn't work the other way, that they get to object. Well, they can object, but they don't have a mechanism for blocking or vetoing if there's a request to change it and the county says, no, we're not going to change it. So specifically what happens normally is that if a petition comes in to amend a zoning district, the town is given notice. They've got 10 days, within 10 days of the public hearing or 10 days after the public hearing that's held on that rezoning, to file a certified resolution disapproving the petition or the rezoning. So they kind of preserve their ability to veto that later action. They can extend that time up by an additional 20 days. They have to do some steps to do that, but typically it's 10 days, within 10 days of that public hearing. So let's say they do that and they submit that resolution disapproving. Then the county board goes ahead and acts on the ordinance to rezone the property, and the town disagrees with that. They can file a resolution disapproving the ordinance, essentially vetoing county board action, and it doesn't get rezoned, or the rezoning action that the county board took is not effective. If the town has not filed that resolution within 10 days of the public hearing, then the action of the county board is final. So if the county board approves the ordinance and rezones it, the town doesn't have the ability to veto it. Likewise, there's nothing in the statute that gives the town any authority other than expressing their disapproval. They don't have the ability to veto an action by the county board to deny the petition. So if the zoning committee denies the petition and comes to the county board, and the county board denies the petition, that's the end of it. The town doesn't have the ability to veto that.
Supervisor Bartlett, did we answer your question? Supervisor Rogers?
Yeah, I think, taking care of my issue.
Okay, then I'll go around, I'll open up, and I'll work from my left to right. Again, questions from, essentially, I'm calling the first row, any from the supervisors. Supervisor Olson.
Just clarification, Dave. You're saying in the county ordinance that we could have a second public hearing at the county board meeting?
Right.
Okay, that's just looking for the clarification. So this really is directed to Jeff, to staff, but where, this by saying you'll seldom see me vote against the recommendation of the committee. I'm not there doing the work, so I'm going to support the decision. But if this body does, I'd like to, maybe it's in our policy that they'll trigger a public hearing in these kind of situations, so we get all the information rather than just dump it back.
Mr. Gifford and I talked about that this morning, and we would like that essentially, Dave, you can speak this, but I feel that should be the policy going forward, where it was voted down by the county board. Then what I'd like to see us have as rules and procedures is that the next county board, that's the public hearing where you hear from both sides, not just the one side. Yes, I think that's a good plan. Okay, any, row two, any question? Oh, excuse me, super.
Okay, I just, a comment on the farmland preservation, the frustration. When you're dealing with the DNR in situations with wetland, you talk about wetland mitigation. The cost of that is so prohibitive to municipalities, and we've experienced that in Cumberland. The utility had purchased 154 acres, I believe, on the southwest corner of Cumberland, which had no runoff to lakes, rivers, or streams. It's just the water sat there. Well, what ended up happening because of all the wetland, at that time they were talking $60,000 to maybe $100,000 an acre for wetland mitigation. Well, who's going to do that? So the city, or I should say the city, our local hospital purchased 64 acres of beautiful farmland on the west side of Cumberland. And it just upset us because we're trying to deal with two entities here. We want to preserve that farmland, which was beautiful. And now all of a sudden we ended up having both. We had to split up that 154 to smaller parcels so we could meet the requirements of wetland, filling in those with the square footage. And now we took that farmland, which will be the site of a new hospital. That's the frustration as a city that we dealt with, hoping that we could preserve that farmland, which we weren't able to do, or our local hospital wasn't. That's just my comment.
Supervisor Lee? No. Okay. Anyone else in the first row? Supervisors in the second row? Supervisor Banks, you have your hand up.
A township that has no ordinances, I'm back to that. And there's farmland preservation. If they don't have the ordinances, they can't participate in the farmland, right?
There is, the only other option, and we don't have any in Barron County, is an ag enterprise area for people that don't have exclusive ag zoning. But we don't have any in Barron County because it's a little harder to develop one. You have to have a willing group of 5 people who want to petition together to make a boundary in a sense. And then once you get that established, you have to sign a 10-year agreement, and then your credit isn't quite as good. It's only $5 an acre. So
But you also mentioned runoff in the areas of streams and lakes. How does that get controlled if they aren't a zone township and they aren't in farm preservation, which farm preservation takes that into consideration, right? How does this?
And that's one of the biggest issues because there isn't a lot of control in those areas.
Oh, well, wait a minute. Repeat it.
There isn't a lot of control in those areas because they're not in the programs. The one thing that we can do is for folks that aren't in farmland preservation, if they're in any federal programs, they have to follow a conservation plan also. But there is no nutrient management requirement in those areas. We don't have an ordinance in the county for nutrient management.
So willy-nilly, they could operate a farm and contaminate a river or lake or stream, correct?
Yep, that happens.
That happens.
Well, the DNR would get involved at that point, obviously, but we would have no control.
I understand that, but I mean, the point I'm trying to make is we have lakes in this county and they're significant. And I guess another question would be, does lake districts play into this too?
That's a good question because if you look at I think Upper Turtle and Poskin, there were some programs where the lake districts were paying farmers that were within a certain distance from the lake to no-till. And those are really good programs to have. And that's another reason why we'd like the Chetek chain of lakes to get a lake association in order to have those kind of programs available.
Well, it's a tax on their property.
It is.
And that's everybody gets their undies in a bundle over that issue.
That's true. It's true.
But
it's right. I mean,
okay, thank you. I appreciate the response.
Supervisor Gores.
What do you call it, on the lake things there, for instance, there, well, I'm on the Barron County rep for Upper Turtle and stuff like that. What it amounts to is those districts, they actually are going to tax themselves to pay for curlew pond weed treatment and stuff like that. But now a little bit different thing here. What do you call it? One of the things we've got here as far as zoning there is that you have to build a residence, you have to have 17 acres or 19 acres or whatever it has. I personally would kind of like to see that changed a little bit. And what it amounts to is something like what Chippewa, I think it's Chippewa, has down there. They sit there and they have a deal there where somebody can sit there and go out and purchase an acre and a half and be able to put a house on it. However, they have to have the agreement with the landowner of that 20 acres that no other house will be built on that existing area. I would like to see something like that versus having to have the 17 acres for the simple reason I've seen there where people sit there and buy 17 acres or 20 acres or whatever have you. And if farmland goes away, they sit there and they let it grow into everything from turn it into a mud bog to run their trucks in to or goat track down there in St. Croix County. There, what do you call them? One guy there sat there and made a doggone pasture into a motorcycle track with all the hills and stuff like that. So anyhow, I would like to see something like that. This where it's sit there all of a sudden there that people don't sit there and just have to purchase such a large tract of land. Where I think you could sit there and keep more land into farmland if you sit there and adopted something into that situation there. Go ahead.
I can respond to that. With that in mind, just looking at this particular photo here, I've been here for 30 plus years. And is Barron County going to look like this? I don't know. If so, it's going to be down the road a ways. But I can tell you that in my 30 years, I'll call it fragmentation. As far as if we could pull up a tax parcel map from 1990 and compare that to a tax parcel map today, the manner in which the parcels have been divided agricultural lands as far as large tracts, being able to farm those. It's significant. We're not going to see a photo like this, okay? But that fragmentation, as we broke these parcels apart, and a lot of that has to do what you're referring to, Jim. So prior to 2016, with the adoption of the current exclusive ag zoning district, the density standard was 1 home per 40. So in the Ag 1 district, the exclusive ag, you had to have 40 acres to put a home. Well, then they stick that home in the middle of it. Now we have a driveway. It severely hampered any farming. The alternative was to rezone half of that. You may recall we did a lot of that. We rezoned 20 acres to meet that 17-acre minimum standard in the Agricultural 2 district. So there were a lot of rezonings coming before the county board, rezoning that exclusive ag to the Ag 2 for the purpose of building a home, prior to the current ordinance where these new standards now apply. But with the adoption of the ordinance, we in fact did what you're referring to, Jim. So right now, we can locate a home in the exclusive agricultural district on as little as 1 acre of property. So the way the ordinance is set up, the minimum acreage for a home rather than 40 acres is 25 acres. Of that 25 acres, 24 acres has to be established into a agricultural covenant. Okay, and what does the same thing? So so the 1 acre is going to be dedicated to where that home is located. Rhonda and I, she works a lot with the applicant. We try to locate that 1 acre in an area that's going to have the least amount of impact on the agricultural use of that property, near a wood line, not in the middle. We really stress with these individuals that that's the purpose of this. So we have 1 acre that's dedicated for the location of the home, but then on the remaining 24 acres, that covenant restricts further residential development. And since we initiated this in 2016, it has been well received by the agricultural community. They like the idea that they can allow some form of development without, quote unquote, selling the farm, selling 40 acres, selling 20 acres. It's allowed them, in some respects, what one farmer told me is that I can keep the legacy of my farm going. I don't have to sell everything. So we do have that provision currently. So we have made changes to reduce the amount of agricultural land that was being rezoned out for the simple fact of placing a home on 20 acres rather than the 40. That's been very successful. And if you look at our GIS mapping on the website, we actually have if you look at the left-hand side, you can click on the map that shows those areas that are currently under this ag preservation covenant. In those areas, you're now allowed to locate another residence. So we have made that change, and that's been very, very helpful, productive for the county.
Okay, we have 11 minutes, and your Robert's Rules of Order on a committee of the whole, when you set the time, it's interesting, cannot be extended. So I want to continue on to the third row if there's questions from this row. Questions from the fourth row. Oscar, I did see your hand. Oscar, you have the floor.
Years ago, I read where 30,000 acres were coming out of agriculture production every year. Do you have a current number on that?
I haven't seen that for number. No, I don't. Sorry.
Maybe it's something we can find. Is that something, Rhonda? You're information guru of everything land. Maybe you can get that. We can talk about that on Monday night. Other questions, Supervisor Rogers?
I'm going back to Carolyn's question, I guess, because all of a sudden I'm not all that clear on it. If the zoning committee and subsequently the county board approves the rezoning and the township doesn't like it, then they can file their resolution
Am I correct on that? Within the certain timeframes?
They have to file a resolution disapproving petition within 10 days of the public hearing, and that's before the county, usually before the county board acts on it.
That's, yeah, okay. Now, if the zoning committee and subsequently the county board denies the request for rezoning, obviously, it's not a rezoning at all. It stays the same. And I'm assuming that the town board has no recourse in that case. They can't come back and say, yeah, but we want that rezoning.
That's correct.
Okay. That helps?
We'll continue. I can't let you ask two questions in a row, Bob. Under Robert's Rules of Order, I can't. So I will go to the people in the stadium seating. Supervisor Stradel, you have the floor.
Well, this is just a comment. What's your first name?
Justin.
Okay, Justin, about runoff and just commonsensical farming process. I live out in the country, the 65 acres next to me is quite hilly. The gentleman owned it prior, tried to keep it at hay most of the time because when he bought it, there was literally as high as these chairs. He took a truck, hauled the dirt in there, took his skid steer, leveled it all up, and reseeded it into hay, and then every 5 years or so, he had to re-till it, put a crop in. So I mean, a lot of this stuff is just common sense. If you see soil washing out of your field, maybe you should do something about it. But that's just a comment.
Supervisor Bartlett, Supervisor Moan.
I have a question. When was the wetlands exchange first initiated?
That wetlands legislation?
Wetlands exchange, yeah.
Oh,
When
gosh,
did that come to be?
I really don't know when that specifically was. That's a DNR rule. It's not necessarily in our ordinance.
Okay.
So I know that it's been a number of years where they've tried to establish what they call a wetland bank, where they can find, purchase these properties and sell it back on. I think.
Supervisor Bartlett, you have the floor.
I think if I heard it right, you said we had 47,771 acres in farmland preservation.
Yes.
And, we got a lot of people buying from out of state now, really don't care about farmland. They want the big fields, whatever. They really don't care about the nutrients and whatever. Of those 47,771 acres, how many acres claim farmland preservation? You said you had 91 contracts. I was just curious.
Those were all the acres that claim.
Okay, so that's not how much is in farmland
Correct.
preservation in Barron County.
No, in the programs that are applying for the credit, that is
That's
47,
in the
that's the total.
program.
Yep.
But that's not what's in
That are eligible.
Ag 1.
Yeah, there's far more acres that are eligible than are being claimed on.
And do we know what that Ag 1 acres are in Barron County?
We could probably find it.
Rhonda
We
could
could
get
find
that
it.
instantly if she had her computer.
I was just curious what's presented to us.
All right, I'm gonna go back to row one, additional questions. Supervisor Lee, you have the floor.
This is more of a comment this time. You mentioned the Lake District and stuff. I was very involved in trying to get one on this type of chain. And we set up a really good program there. And the problem is you got multiple towns and a city. So to the best of my knowledge, the only one that approved to go with it was Prairie Lake, which I might have had something to do with it. But anyway, to try to satisfy everybody, they modified it and cut out half of Chautauqua. Told them at that time, you just killed it for a decade. And they did. That's it.
Supervisor Fall, you have the floor.
Thank you. I don't have a question, I have a comment, and just appreciation for what the staff from the land information has brought to us. Because unless you sit on any zoning or work with it directly, for us to understand the progression of how things have changed, and we all see the cities expanding, whether it was when Walmart came in, and I'm sure we all drove those roads when we were heading to Walmart and smelled that somebody was spreading manure, and obviously, I'm sure there were issues, but I think that this is so helpful when we get things presented on an agenda that we're not real familiar with, that we take a step back and say, well, here's why, folks, and help us do our job maybe better.
Thank you, wonderful comments. Supervisor Banks, you have the floor.
So with our issue on this other 5 acres, what's our next step?
It'll be on the agenda on Monday night.
Okay. And it'll be explained Monday night.
Then Mr. Gifford will be here.
Okay.
All right, supervisors in row, I'm calling row number 3. Any additional questions for the staff? Supervisors in row 4, any additional? Supervisor Rogers, you have the floor.
Just one comment. Louis questioned about what are the effects of going against the county zoning ordinance. Well, I mean, if we violate the county ordinance, it's a violation. No one's going to get thrown into jail, I presume. No one is going to get fined if we do that, but we have taken an oath to uphold the statutes, the Constitution, and our own zoning ordinance.
I don't know if the oath included that third one or not.
Well, it should.
Okay. Again, supervisors in row 4, any additional questions? Supervisors in the stadium seating, questions for staff at this time? Okay, I'm gonna look around the room for any questions from supervisors.
I just got the one. What do you call it? It falls back to what I said there at the last meeting there. Is that how did these other event centers get passed through when all this stuff is in place in the first place?
I believe Dave can answer that.
I looked at that. All those were approved prior to the adoption of the new ordinance in 2016.
We are at 10. Dave, do you have a comment? Yes.
Just a closing comment. First of all, thank you. We appreciate the opportunity. And we don't need a special meeting to keep the conversation, okay? Looking at the county board agendas, questions in general, please contact the office, contact me, and I'll explain what's really before the board, why this request is being asked for, you know, the ordinance that's in place, what's being requested. Gladly answer any questions. But I truly appreciate the opportunity to just have an overview of the process. Zoning can be complicated. Zoning is not sometimes your best friend, because we tell people no a lot. And so I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Okay, we have 2 items of business and then I will step down. Number 1, we're at 10:59, so we need to wrap up here by 11 by our rules and procedures. But that begs the question, what is the report that the committee of the whole wants to refer to him? Because when we close this committee of the whole under Robert's Rules of Order, I need to rise and report. Rise means that we've ended. Report means that I'm supposed to tell the chairman of the assembly what we did or learned. And the way I constructed the agenda to keep it simple was, my report could simply be, you received a report from staff in the Land Information Department. You received the information, you asked questions, and you're not going to take any action at this time. But I want to make sure that that is the consensus of the committee of the whole. Mr. Gerlin.
I make a motion that we do that, and that you report.
I have a motion from Mr. Supervisor Gerlin that I rise and report that we received information and took no action. Mr. Schradel.
Second, Mr. Gerlin.
We have a motion and a second on the floor. Discussion. All in favor of the motion as I have restated, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion passes. It is 11 a.m. I will step down as chair of the committee of the whole, and Mr. Oki, you are in charge of the meeting. Yes, I also said accept the motion to adjourn as committee of the whole. Supervisor Banks, Supervisor Mosentine, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Committee of the whole is adjourned. It's your chairman.
Thank you, everybody. I think it was the reason we had this was to educate everybody, and you did a great job of listening, and presentations were great, and the questions were real, they're right to the point, and I thank you for all attending and being part of this. I guess we're on to item number 8, report for the county administrator.
Well, Mr. Chairman, before that, as chair of the committee of the whole, I would like to read from Robert's Rules of Order. Committee Chairman, Mr. President, as chairman of the committee of the whole, we had under consideration before the committee of the whole to receive information from 3 members of the Land Information Department on state statutes and zoning, county zoning, and farmland preservation. I was directed by this committee to tell you that they received this information and at this time are going to take no further action, and my report follows as the same, and my report is concluded.
Thank you. So is that number 8, the report for the
Yes.
county administrator?
Yes, it is.
Number 9, do you have any appointments?
I do not.
Number 10, claims, petitions, and correspondence. None. Suggestions for future agenda items, well, when the county board packet will be out soon tomorrow, Monday night. Anything further?
What's the
Right,
time of that meeting? 7 o'clock?
7 o'clock.
We're back to,
Back to 7 o'clock until what, November?
November. Right.
So 7 o'clock Monday night.
Okay, thank you, man.
Don't keep one. Okay, if there's nothing else, what time is it? 11:04. We'll adjourn by unanimous consent. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Nice job.